Up, I'm black and blue. I'm built for all the abuse.
She was walking through the hallway, its opposite direction of the building. It's kinda dark this side. This area is only restricted to a few persons. When a hand covered her wrist and pulled her inside a dark room, she was pinned to the wall, dark rigor covering her figure. Ian didn't make a noise. She knew who he is. Aren't you afraid of me, sweetheart? A raspy voice stirred through her ears. Why should I? She said while smirking, looking directly in his eyes. Jungkook, I spoiled you a little too much, no? He said, getting more closer to her, closing the inches between them. Putting his head in her neck, inhaling her scent, sending a shiver down her spine. A soft giggle escaped her lips when he touched her skin, making her tickle slightly. When more than a bit, I guess, she said, teasing him more. Jungkook smiled in between. Jungkook, you smell like, he murmured, his voice low and intimated. He paused. Wine looked at him curiously. Jungkook, like mine. His raspy voice reached her ears. Wine heard flutters at his words. Jungkook, you're late today, he said, looking at her face with his one eyebrow up. Wine got stuck up with some work. Jungkook looked at her eyes with a little smile on his face. He smirked before he could close the distance between them. When a knock interrupted them, Wine startled and pushed Jungkook away. He stumbled back, a raw growl escaping his mouth in frustration. They turned towards the door just as it opened, revealing his father standing in the doorway. Jungkook cursed under his breath and straightened up. His father entered and his eyes straight landed on Wine. When Jungkook saw this with his straight face, he came forward and blocked the view of him. Jungkook, is there something you need? Jungkook asked, protectiveness etched to his voice. Wine looked at them and said, Wine, I'll be outside, Mr. June, if you need anything. She said, getting out of the room. His dad and both Jungkook looked at her getting out of the room and the door getting closed. His father, the formidable head of the mafia, eyed his son. He put his both hands on his back with straight and broad shoulders. Mr. June, I see. You found yourself a distraction. His tone cold. Jungkook knew what he was talking about, Mr. June. And you know how I feel about distraction? Jungkook's jaw tightened. She's not a distraction, Mr. June. Get rid of the distraction as soon as possible, or I'll do it my way, he said with cold tone and left from there after that. The threat hung in the air. The echo of his words lingered long after he was gone. Jungkook cursed. Jungkook's jaw tightened. His fist clenched at his sides. He knew exactly what his father meant. He couldn't let anything happen to her. Jungkook is the next underground mafia. World knows him as a famous billionaire CEO. His mom died when he was only 11. His dad was a busy and ruthless mafia. The only person Jungkook had that time was Mr. Han. He brought up Jungkook like his own son. Jungkook was so close to him. He was like his dad, Wen is Mr. Han's daughter. When he died 2 years ago, he asked Jungkook to take care of her after him. And after that, there was not a time when Jungkook left her alone. She's 8 years younger than him. She worked as his assistant too. She lives in his building next to his penthouse. Jungkook owned that building. She's the only family he has now. The only thing he knows that he couldn't lose her at any cost. He left from there hurriedly. At night, Wayne was sitting in the living room watching Netflix with popcorns in her hand. She looked at the clock. It shows 12 p.m. Sharp knock came from the apartment's door. She got up and went to check. She opened the door. Jungkook standing with his one hand on the door frame in his messy state. His eyes were a little too heavy. Hair was rough. When what happened? She asked greatly and stepped aside to let him in. He walked in and threw his coat on the sofa. Ryan looked at his back. Jungkook, just a bad day, princess. He sat on the sofa and looked at her. Wayne, do you want to have something? She closed the door and came back. Jungkook just looked at her and at the space beside him, giving her a silent invitation to sit beside him. Jungkook looked at her like he's going to disappear any moment, like it's the last time he's seeing her. This thought made him anxious. Wine slowly approached him and sat beside him. She looked at him. He smiled softly, looking at her with his tired eyes. With tender care, he cupped her face gently, her innocent eyes seeing him. He brushed his fingers through her strands. Did I tell you are so beautiful? His raspy voice echoed her ears. When blinked at his sudden confession, her lips parted, looking at him. He pulled her closer to him, closed his eyes, kissed her forehead. Her heart skipped a beat. He looked at her again. You are too precious, princess, said in his husky voice. Before she could respond, he leaned in slowly. It was slow, unhurried, and sent heat through her entire body. She responded instinctively, her hand reaching his shoulder, tightly fisting his shirt. The next moment, Jungkook pulled her in his lap. One hand on her neck and the other in her hair, pulling her more closer to him. After a minute, Jungkook, she said softly, her voice panting due to lack of breath. Jungkook looked at her, who was out of breath. He gave her a last small peck softly and scooped her in his arms. He gently got up, carrying her in his arms, and walked towards the bedroom. One hand was against his shoulder, her hand on his broad chest. She could feel his heartbeat. He pushed open her room's door with his foot gently. The room was dim, the moonlight coming from the window creating a peaceful atmosphere. Jungkook gently laid her on the bed as she settled on the pillows. He looked at her, who was looking at her with her shining, innocent eyes. Jungkook, can I sleep here? He asked softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Beside you? He said with his most tired voice. Wayne was confused. She nodded hesitatingly. Wayne, yeah, softly said to him. Jungkook smiled, warm expression that lit up his tired eyes. He slipped off his shoes and climbed into the bed beside her, pulling the blanket over them both. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her more closer, her back nestled against his chest. Jungkook, good night, Wine, he whispered into her ears, his breath tickling her skin. Wine. Good night, Jungkook, she said, equally soft, his warmth mantling her. She could hear his deep breath, meaning he's fast asleep. Thinking his day was too long, soon she also drifted into sleep. Under the moonlight coming from the window, they both were sound asleep in each other's arms. Jungkook puffed. At 3 a.m. at night, for the past 15 minutes, he kept looking at her, who was sleeping in his arms without caring about the world. He gave a kiss on her forehead. He carefully took out his hand, which was under her waist, and get off from the bed quietly. He walked outside the room, grabbed his coat, and left from there. After some time, he reached the mansion. He got inside and saw someone waiting for him. The hall was little too dark, adding tense to the atmosphere. Jungkook, you call me? Mr. Yoon said. Jungkook looked at him with a cold face, but didn't said, making him more furious. Mr. Yoon, you're not going to talk to that girl again. His loud voice echoed through the hall. Jungkook didn't startle. He just looked at him what he was talking about. He's used to his father talking to him like that. Mr. Yoon, are we clear? Jungkook got up furiously. Jungkook, why are you dragging her into all of this? Equally loud voice. His father smirked. He put a hand on his shoulder. That girl is just one call away to be removed from her existence. He patted his shoulder mockingly. Jungkook knows what he was talking about. He clenched his fist. Jungkook, you are not going to touch her here, he said with his stiffened jaw. Mr. Yoon, that's up to you. You know what I'm capable of. Marry Sabrina and she'll be out of it. With a smirk, he left from there. Jungkook kicked the table in front of him harshly. He was on the verge of killing the person in front of him. Jungkook, now we are going to play this game like your way, Mr. Yoon. Dirty, he whispered and smirked. The next morning, sunlight coming from the window made Wine's eyes slightly moved. She slowly gained her consciousness and opened her eyes. She turned around and reached out a hand for Jungkook, but the space was empty. She sat up on the bed and looked around the room. It was quiet and still. That means he left. She sighed softly and went to freshen up. Today the deal feels different. She tirelessly went office. Something feels a bit different today. She didn't meet Jungkook today. 8 unanswered calls. He wasn't even answering her calls. Today's night, everyone was going to celebrate the New Year party at June Mansion. She thought maybe Jungkook was busy with that thing, so she just distracted her thoughts, thinking positive. Awa, Wine, you coming tonight? Her best friend asked her. Wine, Awa, you can't just miss this big night. We're going to have so much fun. Awa tried her best to make her agree. Wine sighed and nodded. She couldn't deny her. Ava hugged her with excitement. Wine laughed lightly, seeing her happy. After her dad's death, she's only close to Ava and Jungkook only. Later that night, Wine stepped into the grand mansion garden with Ava beside her, her red wine dress hugging her curves, complimenting her ethereal beauty. Every eyes were glued on her. She could sense that Ava told her that she's going to the dance floor to have some fun. Wine looked at the bar, which was at the center. She took slow steps to walk there, looking around at the beautiful garden decorated with multiple lights. She looked ahead where Jungkook with his group of friends entered, looking lavish in tuxedo. His face showing no emotion, while lips moved up into a little smile, walking right past her, not even looking at her, standing next to his father, hugging a girl who was beside his dad, with a little smile on his face. It was as she was invisible to him, leaving her confused. Her smile faded. She turned back her head and walked to the bar, sat on the chair, wine glass in her hand. It was New Year's Eve, and this celebration was more than just a simple party. As the clock struck midnight, Jungkook's father took the microphone. He eyes Wine with a smirk on his face. Ladies and gentlemen, this night is more than a New Year's night, because today we are announcing the engagement of my son, Jihoon Jungkook, and my friend's daughter, Sabrina. The room burst with applause. Wine stood frozen, the world spinning around her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her eyes became wet. Tears blurred her vision. Her body lost balance before she could fall. Ava held her. Wine, she whispered softly, looking at her. She was looking at Jungkook, their eyes meeting across the room. Feeling the sense of betrayal, she turned around. Wine, Ava, take me out, she whispered in her shaky voice. Ava looked at Jungkook and glared at him, giving him the eyes which tells, don't get near her or she'll kill him. She turned around and took Wine away from there. Jungkook face tightened, seeing her leaving out with Ava. He knew this would happen. He didn't leave the ground. Many people came to congratulate him. With his straight face, he stood there. Wine puff, Wine. It's hard to believe, Ava. It's hard to believe. Wine was shouting in anger. She was with Ava. Wine came back her home. She didn't want to spend any second there. Wine, he must be doing this because of his dad. I know. I just knew that. I was making her calm down, but Wine's face was full of tears. Her face was wet with tears. She covered her face with her small hands and cried her heart out, sobbing menacingly. Ava held her and hugged her. She patted her back to calm her down, but she wasn't in her senses. Wine, I only had only one person, she said while sobbing. Our heart clenched, seeing her crying like a child. Ava, Wine, stop, baby, he doesn't deserve you, she said, calming her down. Ava held her and calmed her down while Wine slept. In the middle of night, someone knocked the door. Wine was sleeping, Ava was still awake. She got down and went to check. Jungkook puffed. Jungkook stood anxiously at Wine's apartment door. He was desperate to see her. Her sad face made him restless as party. As the door slowly opened, his eyes met Ava. Jungkook, Wine, where is she? Ava, she's here, but she doesn't want to see you. Jungkook, I need to talk to her. Step aside. Was already ancient and she's not letting him inside. Do you have any idea how much you've hurt her? I had never meant to hurt her, he said while tight jaw. Please, just let me see her for a moment. Ava, she's asleep and you need to leave. Wine's sleep was already disturbed because of those noises coming from the outside. She became aware whose voice is this. With her tired eyes, she got down from the bed and walked to the door with her swollen eyes because of a lot of cryings. Jungkook looked behind Ava. His eyes met hers. Jungkook whined. He said softly. She eyed Ava and assured her that she will talk to him. Ava moved aside when Wine came forward. Only word that came from Wine's mouth where she asked softly, was any of us real? Jungkook, hell yes, princess, let me explain. Wine chuckled sadly. I don't believe your lies anymore. With that, she closed the door on his face harshly. She leaned against the wall, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Jungkook stood outside. Jungkook breathing heavily, resting his forehead against the door. Jungkook, it was all real, princess, he whispered, sighed. Her sad face, swollen eyes made his heart clench. He stood there for a moment and left from there. The next morning, Ava wasn't leaving Wine alone, but Wine assured her that she is all right now. So Ava left in the morning. Wine got ready to leave for the office. First, she didn't want to go, but she didn't want to show anyone that she is weak. She left for the work. The whole day she was engulfed in her work. When she was passing through the corridor, she saw Jungkook standing at the end of the hallway waiting for someone. Her heart skipped a beat. Jungkook looked up and their eyes met for a moment. Wine turned around, changing her way. She could feel his gaze following her, but she didn't stop. Jungkook stood in the hallway, his heart sinking as he watched her walking away. He wanted to call her to explain everything, but he knew she isn't ready to hear it. He clenched his fist, frustrated with the situation, but he was giving her space too. The whole day she was engulfed in her work, not talking to anyone. Wine gathered courage and walked towards Jungkook's cabin. She wanted to give all the files. She knocked Jungkook's cabin and without wasting a second, she went inside the office. Jungkook looked up at her, his face unreadable, cold and straight, showing no emotion in his eyes. Wine looked around, saw a young girl sitting in front of him and his father beside her. Her heart sank. Jungkook's father smirked, looking at her. Wine, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to drop the files here. Check it out. Oh, well, why and meet Jungkook's fiance. Hi, myself, Wine. It's nice to meet you. Only Jungkook knew what would she be feeling from inside. Yeah, just like that. A smile like that. Kill them with your smile. Don't let yourself down because of like me, princess. His other hands tightened, seeing her smiling like that. Why no, take a leave now. She put the files near in the desk. She turned to leave. Jungkook's eyes followed her with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. He knew he had to find a way to make things right, but for now he remained silent, fighting with his emotion as she walked away and left from there. As Wine left from there, her heart weighted heavily with sadness. With each step took felt like a burden. She replayed the scene in Jungkook's cabin over and over again. She couldn't help but feel a pang of envy, imagining the future Jungkook had planned with others. She left the office building. As she walked in the streets, surrounded by the noise of the city, she felt alone. Cold breeze of winter surrounded her. Despite the ache in her heart, she kept moving forward. Sitting in the garden beside a serene lake, Wine found herself engulfed in a flood of memories. She closed her eyes, allowing herself transported back to the moments she had spent with Jungkook in this place. Despite the pain of their parting, she couldn't deny the beauty of the moment they had shared. As the sun dipped below, casting a golden glow across the water, Wine felt a sense of peace wash over her. With a sigh, Wine opened her eyes, capturing the fading beauty of the sun. After a moment, she gathered herself and left from there. She went inside her apartment building, walked inside the lift. Before the door slides closed, Jungkook slid inside the lift, wearing the same suit he was wearing in his office. Their both eyes locking with each other. She broke the eye contact. Wine stands away, creating a good gap between them, not looking at him again. Jungkook poked his tongue, sensing her discomfort. She could feel his eye on her, but she didn't care. She made him non-existent. Part of her wanted to scream, demand answers, while another part wanted to escape to put as much distance between them as possible. But she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, after what felt eternity, the elevator reached her floor. She stepped out into the hallway, completely ignoring him. As she walked towards her apartment in the dim light of hallway, she felt someone was following her. She started walking again. She felt her grip on her hand, and she was pulled into a dim light room. Her heart raced. She panicked a little, but she knew who he could be. Before she could react, he pulled her more closer and pinned her to the wall. His intense gaze was locked on her. Jungkook, I've given you a lot of space, I think, and this is enough. he said calmly. Fine, leave me. She tried to come out of his grip. Jungkook, no. His grip tightening slightly. We need to talk. You can't keep running away. Fine, leave me or I'm going to shout, she said loudly, getting out from his grip. Wine, you're a cheater, liar. How could you do this to me? She said, hitting him on his chest. Jungkook, listen to me, Wine, he said, making her calm down, but she wasn't listening to him. She kept hitting him. No, I am done listening to your lies, she shouted, her words coming out in anger and frustration. Wine, you make me believe in you and then you tore apart everything. How could you? Hitting him again, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her cheeks. Jungkook stood there taking it all in, his own heart breaking, saw her in this condition. He tried to pull her closer, but in a brief moment, her hand raised and she slapped him across the cheek, taking out only anger and frustration. In that slap, his face turned to side. Moment of silence. Without warning, he pulled her closer in one pull, closed the distance between them. The pain, the love, the regret, and the longing. For a moment, time seems to stop. Her mood calmed down a little bit. One pulled away slightly and breath shortened. Before she could say anything, he pulled her into another one. Cupping her face with his hands, deepening it. His hand reached to her waist, and with a swift emotion, he lifted her up and sat her on the table behind them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, their forehead resting against each other. You can't fix this with this, she whispered, her voice breaking. Jungkook, I know, but you're the only woman of my life, princess. I only love two women in my life. I lost one, but I can't bear to lose another one. His voice broke apart. This was the first time he showed this side of her to her. Wine didn't respond. Jungkook, I was only playing with Tat's plan. I couldn't let him know how much you mean to me. You're both my weakness and strength, princess. He will use you against me. You know how much I am. He said to leave you and marry the mafia's daughter so that it will increase his status. Jungkook, if I didn't listen to him, my plans of ruining him would be ruined. I have to take him down, but I have to keep you away too. He had his men eyes on you and me both. One was silently listening to him. He looked at her in her eyes. They both stared at each other for a moment. His eyes were wet, but tears didn't left. Jungkook, I thought if I could keep you at distance so then I could protect you, but I was so wrong. Princess, I love you so much. I didn't want you to get hurt at any cost. This was the first time he said those words to her. He stood resting his head on her shoulder. For a moment they stood there in silence. She hesitatingly put her hand around him, his body relaxing against him. After some seconds, he lifted his head from her shoulder and looked into her eyes. There was softness in his eyes. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss on her forehead. And then kissed her both eyes, which cried because of him. "Jungkook, I'm sorry," he whispered. He looked up at her again. Taking a deep breath, she reached up and cupped his cheek. Her touch gentle. She kissed his red cheek where she just slapped him before whining. "I'm sorry for this," she said softly, kissing him again and again on his cheek while he held her from the waist from his both hands. "Just play along with me," he whispered. Wine nodded silently. "Jungkook, I missed you so freaking much, baby," he whispered, looking at her in her eyes. Wine blushed. Her cheeks became red. She locked her arms around his neck, and he carried gently her to his sacred apartment.